Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. I'm Dr. Shannon Ray. I always want to say, and I'm joined by my co-host, but, that's not the case. But my mind wants to say it. I want to apologize for not uploading. It's been about a month. I can't believe it's been a month already since I last uploaded. That's just madness to me. Life goes by too fast. Yeah, it's been a while since my last upload. This is due to the fact that I had to visit family in Kansas. So I was visiting family, which kind of disrupted my normal uploading schedule. So I hope you guys all understand, and I appreciate your guys' patience. And I appreciate anyone who is still listening to this show. Like, I'm actually pretty, really thankful. That's really cool for anyone who's still listening, especially if you started from the beginning and are all the way at this point. Like, I'm very, very grateful, very thankful for your attention and time. Just wanted to say that. But yeah, so I recorded a new episode, and I think that it's gonna be a bit of a challenging episode to get through for most people. And so I'm gonna try to set up some of the ideas that will be communicated in the episode so that it's easier to comprehend, which we'll see if that helps. But this episode is a very Buddhist heavy episode. I discuss a lot about the concepts of form and the idea of being in a perceptual realm. And I do it in the context of quantum mechanics. So a lot of this episode is me trying to communicate my understanding of Buddhism through my understanding of quantum mechanics. So I'm using the lens of quantum mechanics to understand Buddhism, which is something that I want to continue to develop over time. So hopefully people will stick around and check it out. And it's also the same way that I understand Christianity. So I can also bring to bear my understanding of mathematics and the quantum mechanics world to give my interpretation and understanding of Christianity. And one of my ultimate goals is to try to communicate to people the connection between Christianity and Buddhism, the symmetry, the resolution between the two, to stitch these two worlds together in a seamless way such that they imbue meaning on each other in a way that's obviously true. So that's something that I want to develop too. And, as time goes on, I'll be working toward that goal. So that's something you guys can look forward to listening to. But this particular episode is really focused on the idea of worlds, of perceptual worlds. And it has some heavy discussion, like mathematical discussion and quantum, some of the ideas in quantum. And I'm hoping that by creating a dialogue between the realm or the world of quantum mechanics and the world of Buddhism, that they can make each other more clear and easier to understand. But yeah, so it's one of the things that I really want people to think about while they're listening to this episode is the idea of symmetry. And if you've listened to this podcast enough, when I'm talking about symmetry, I'm talking about the idea that there is some constraint data, and that constraint data creates a boundary. The things that are not consistent with the constraint data are excluded from the boundary, and the things that are consistent with the constraint data are included within the boundary. They're included. And the point to that is, if all you have is the constraint data, so in the episode, It's Algebra All the Way Down, one of the examples that we used was the idea of someone saying, there's going to be cake at the party. But the problem with that is the constraint data is just the word cake. It doesn't tell you if it's going to be an ice cream cake. It doesn't tell you if it's going to be a chocolate cake. It doesn't tell you if it's going to be a urinal cake. It's just cake. And so all of these other cakes, like all these different types of cake, are consistent with the constraint data cake. And so because of that, that there's going to be cake there, not burritos. Cake points to cake. It doesn't point to burritos. So with the constraint data, burrito is excluded, but all those cakes are included. And so if you only have the information cake, you can't be certain which type of cake you're going to see when you get there. You just know that you're going to see a cake. And so what that means is that all those different possible cakes are symmetric with respect to the data of cake. And because you don't have additional information that points toward chocolate cake versus ice cream cake, then you have to treat all concepts that are consistent with the constraint data cake equally as being something possible that will be seen when you get to that party. And so this is the idea of symmetry. The symmetry is associated with ignorance. It's associated with the idea that there does not exist any more additional information to distinguish one cake from another cake. And so the idea of symmetry is associated with the idea of ignorance, because symmetry implies that there isn't additional information to distinguish between cakes. And this concept is important when trying to understand the idea of stitching together worlds and the idea of form in Buddhism. And the reason why is because when you're stitching together worlds, you have to think of the idea that the two worlds must contain some data that is consistent between the two. And so if the two worlds the two worlds have to contain data that is consistent between the two. So you have to imagine, just think of the reality in which there's an ice cream cake is a different world from the reality in which there is a chocolate cake, German chocolate cake. So the reality in which there's a German chocolate cake is a different world or reality than the world if there was an ice cream cake at that party. And so these two worlds are stitched together by the data cake. These two worlds are stitched together by the data cake because the data cake is consistent in both worlds. No matter what world you end up, whether it's German chocolate cake world or ice cream cake world, in both cases, there is a cake in that world. And so that's the symmetry between those two worlds. That's where those worlds stitch together. And so when I'm talking about Buddhism, I'm doing it through the lens and the context of quantum mechanics. And I'm trying to find the ideas or the concepts that overlap between those two worlds. And it's connecting them together at the overlap that allows you to, like, that process of connecting them on their overlap is to find their symmetries. And if you connect them at the symmetries, then they can imbue meaning on each other. They become metaphors. That's how you create what I call literal metaphors. To create a literal metaphor is to find the literal overlap between two worlds or two concepts, such that you pass information across the overlaps. And if you're passing information across the overlaps, then you're not losing any data, because the overlap is where those two worlds meet. And so in this episode of the podcast, I will be discussing ideas of form in the context of Buddhism and relating that to the concept of density operators that I use in my research in quantum mechanics. And the thing that connects these two things together is that the form or the density operator provides the constraint data. The form and the density operator is like someone providing the data cake. And so in my research, I have these things called purifications. And the purifications are like the additional information of ice cream cake versus German chocolate cake. So ice cream cake and German chocolate cake are purifications with respect to the form, which is the density operator. And so this is an analogy that I'm making. So I'm telling you to think of it this way. Think of it thus. In my research, the density operator provides the constraint information. It's like the word cake. The purifications in my research are like the different worlds that are consistent with the information in the constraint data. So in this analogy, German chocolate cake world is a purification and ice cream cake world is a purification. They provide additional information and they're both consistent with cake. And so in Buddhism, when I'm thinking of form, I'm thinking of it, the example I use is the idea of the glass half full and the glass half empty. In this case, a glass filled halfway up with water is the form, it's the constraint data. And then from that constraint data, you can have the interpretation that the glass is half full or you can have the interpretation that the glass is half empty. Both of these interpretations are consistent with the constraint data or the form, which is a glass that has water filled halfway up. And the perception that it's half full or half empty is based off of your conditioning. There's nothing about the form that says that it must be one way or the other. And so these are the symmetries that I'm trying to map between the quantum mechanics of my research and the idea of form in Buddhism. And all of these are connected with the idea of symmetry. The idea of you provide some constraint data, and then you have all of the things that are consistent with the constraint data. This is a very important construction in my worldview. It's a very important construction in the ideas communicated in the podcast. And it's not the simplest concepts to understand, but if you can understand it and break it down, I think that you will start seeing the podcast and the ideas within much clearer. Because remember, this podcast is a language. It is a world. It is a realm of perception. It is my thesis of reality. It is my spirit. And it is the lens with which I see. And so to be able to understand this idea of symmetries and the overlap between all the purifications, the overlap between all the purifications is the constraint data. Because this is the whole point to this podcast, is to create a language that allows everyone to contribute their perspective to our collective spirit, our collective soul, our collective worldview. And to do that, I'm trying to provide the code to be able to stitch these worlds together in a way that is seamless. So there is no delusion. The world is pure, without delusion, without lies. And so that requires us having to genuinely sit down and figure out, you have this perspective, I have this perspective. If both perspectives contain truth or are the truth, then they must be able to stitch together somewhere, because they're going to have an overlap over the truth. And actually stitching them together and finding the overlap is the way to come to know others. But by doing so, you come to know yourself. And so that's the purpose of this podcast. And so this particular concept of the connection of realms of perceptions or worlds through shared data and shared information is essential. It's also the foundation of my understanding of the word literally. What does literally mean? Oh yeah, so that's actually another good example to kind of like bring this home is Evangelion. So I distinguish certain types of art as being literal, like the art that uses literal metaphor. And this idea of using literal metaphor is how I understand the concept of a thesis. I think the whole point to a thesis is that you are trying to communicate your vision of reality, what you think reality is, by constructing a language to understand it, and then stitching together your language to real data in the world. And it's the stitching together of your conceptual language and data that can be verified by any person in the world that makes your ideas a thesis. This is what I think a thesis is. It's to use literal metaphor to say what reality is. And literal metaphor is to find the symmetry or overlap between worlds. And so one of the examples I really like is Evangelion, because that show is about a group of kids or people who are operating these biological computers that they are, and when they operate them, when they pilot the Avas, these giant, massive biological computers, they have to synchronize with them. They have to harmonize with them. They have to harmonize their mind and body with this biological computer. And they're just like a subsystem within this larger biological computer that can influence what it does, but they don't have complete control over it. And so this uses literal metaphor because it's describing life, existence. It's saying something like, okay, look at yourself. What are you? What are you? Remember, go back to the episode Minds and Computer Algorithms, where we look at the symmetries between minds and computer algorithms. Both our physical body and the computer are physical subsystems of the universe that can be placed in many different configurations, and the configuration they're in depends on what data they take in and how they process data. And the fact that you can be placed in many configurations or be programmed, it can be verified because if I tell you a secret, you can get up, physically carry that secret into another room and tell someone else that secret. And so because you're able to carry it physically from one location to the next, then that means I had to have programmed it into you. This is an objective fact. You can't deny it. It's just how reality works. And so in Evangelion, what they're doing is they're saying, okay, let us construct a story that has this particular data in it. The data of piloting a biological computer. And the show itself is a significant thesis about what it means to be human. It's a show that is deeply examining the human condition and our spirit and who we are. That's what that show is. And because the main focus of the show is piloting these Evas, because the data about biological computers is consistent with us being computers, as in the example I gave just now, because that data is consistent in our world as it is in the Evangelion world, when events occur in the Evangelion world, we can comprehend and understand them based off of our own experience of piloting our Evas. And so this show has literal metaphors in it, and it really does seem as though it is something like the creator's thesis on humanity. It's a very beautiful show. And so this episode of the podcast that I am uploading today, this is the focus. It's this idea of looking at what worlds you live in and how do they stitch together? What world are we in? And what world you're in depends on what experiences you have. Like, you're trying to figure out what world you're in, you know. And this is something that I mentioned in the podcast as well in this episode. Hopefully this is sufficient to set up the episode. And you know, there's a couple more things I wanted to mention before I go, because I'm about to go ahead and log out. But some of the things I wanted to mention is I realized while listening to the episode back after I recorded it that there's a process that I describe in like the second half of the episode of the main recording, where I'm describing this process of going from a particular world, a particular perspective, like a particular world being the glass half full world. And I'm stepping outside of that world to embody the spirit associated with the realm of form. So instead of seeing a glass half full or half empty, I just see the glass. And so this process of stepping outside of the world of glass half full to just the world of the form, I'm pretty sure that is the reverse process of the wave function collapse in quantum mechanics. So I was listening to that, like, oh, I think that's what that is. So I just wanted to point that out. Another thing that I wanted to point out was there's a couple times where I mentioned the name of my most recent paper, and I keep saying quantum gravity instead of quantum ignorance. And so, you know, when I'm recording this, I'm kind of flowing, and I guess quantum gravity was on my mind, and I just kind of misspoke. So I meant to say quantum ignorance, so you can catch that. The last thing I wanted to mention too is that when I'm talking about worlds, there is part of my perspective on quantum mechanics is that we do live in a multiverse. You know, this isn't something that has been proven or anyone accepts it scientific. You know, it's not like the scientific community accepts my interpretation of quantum mechanics, but I haven't really communicated it to many people. And the people that I have communicated it to seem to think it makes a lot of sense. So I have some confidence in it, but I'm not like completely married to the idea. But I do believe that we live in a multiverse. I think that multiverse is a consequence of the idea that there is finite information in the world. So there isn't infinite information. And since there isn't infinite information, then there's never exactness. There's only a set of constraints, which is the physical configuration of energy and matter in the universe. And beyond that, there are many perceptual worlds that are consistent with that constraint data. And so all those perceptual worlds, I would consider the many worlds. And this is associated with many worlds as understood by Everett, the Everett many world interpretation of quantum mechanics, because the stuff I work in has to do with composite systems, which is the context in which many worlds of Everett is understood. And I do actually have like a more formal construction of the idea, which is not something I'm communicating in this episode. But I do think that when I'm using the word world here, I am speaking of in the context of many worlds. That's just my personal thoughts on the matter. So without much ado, please enjoy the episode, and I hope you guys like it. Peace. I love life. I don't know. Life is just so interesting. I was listening to the sutras on the advice of the layman Vimalakirti. I'm listening to those. And it made me think, while I was listening to it, about the space I live in, where my mind spends its time. What world am I in? What world am I in my mind at any given moment? Am I in the world of happiness? Am I in the world in which Buddhism exists? And Christianity and Islam and Judaism? Is that the world I'm in which these things exist? And when I'm studying Buddhism, when I'm thinking about Buddhism, when I'm listening to sutras or reading sutras, when I'm meditating, when I'm cultivating happiness, where I'm allowing people to be free, giving them freedom to be who they are, not get upset with them, and just love them despite their flaws, because that's how reality is. It's the suchness of it. That's what it's like to live in a Buddhist world, in the world of Buddhism. And so when I'm listening to these sutras, the one about Vimalakirti, it's like my head is just conjuring images of this person. My mind is conjuring images of the bodhisattvas. My mind is conjuring images of the monks. In my mind, I'm imagining the Buddha going in, sitting down, eating his food quietly after begging. And then I'm imagining people coming and sitting next to him, bearing their shoulder and asking him questions and him explaining them. And so that's the world I'm living in my head. And so when I live in that world, I'm imagining these things, these images, that create feelings that go with them. So then I have feelings, like every time they're telling the story, like my mind and body is going through emotions that I imagine and go through a simulation of the story. And so I'm like living in that world. Like I'm really I'm creating and rendering a world in my head, and then I'm getting feelings and emotions. And the similarity between that and the regular reality that we see as reality, in which those religions that I mentioned earlier exist, that thing we just call as, obviously basic reality, but it functions the same way as the one I made in my head, which is that you get inputs that make you go through a series of feelings. It's like that's the simulation. This is what it's like to interact with art. This is what it's like to be in a relationship with something. It's like you're navigating a space in your mind, and it gives you inputs, which then makes you go through different experiences, feelings, and emotions. So if you're using that as your macro data, as the data that's consistent, then when you shift your understanding of that being the relevant information, and then think about all the things that create that scenario in which there's a space in your mind. Like when I'm doing math and physics, my mind is moving in the space of math and physics. Like I'm rendering those spaces in my head. Like I'm actually imagining the Cartesian coordinates. I'm imagining the black holes. I'm imagining the rotations. I'm imagining the geometry. I'm imagining the space when I'm optimizing. Like I'm writing code to optimize and like these really high dimensional spaces. Like I have an abstraction of that space in my mind as I'm programming it. And so this is what I'm trying to say about reality, is you have to understand that all of those worlds are real. What do you mean by real? And in this sense, what I mean by real is the things which give experience. sensation, perception, conditioning, and consciousness. Sensation, perception, conditioning, and consciousness. Sensation. Sensation is the inputs, the things that, the sensations, the things that give you inputs. Perception. You have a perception of the things that are creating inputs. And that perception is based off your conditioning, your past experiences, what you're clinging to, what you're holding on to, what you identify as, the self, the conditioning, your conditioning. What are your settings? It's basically your configuration. Think of it as your configuration. Imagine something like some graph paper, and just imagine taking every square on the graph paper, square graph paper, just grids, and just thinking of all the combinations of black and white you can make. Each combination of black and white is a different configuration. And so your conditioning is your configuration. What are the things that create the lens with which you see reality? Conditioning causes perception and consciousness. And then the consciousness is the conscious experience, of feeling of like being aware. The consciousness is the aspect of being aware, awakening, Buddha nature. Everyone has Buddha nature because everyone has some degree of awareness, sentient being. It's like they're associating awareness with consciousness, sentient being. So in Buddhism, these are 4 of the 5 skandhas, the 5 aggregates that make up a sentient being. And then the other one is just their physical body. So the physical body is like your physical configuration, your physical data. And then you have this perceptual realm, which is made up of the sensation, perception, conditioning, and consciousness. So that's like their model. That's their model of a mind. That's their model of a conscious being, of a sentient being. That's a really good fucking model, guys. That's a really good model. And so, like, what I'm saying is that when I'm living in Buddhism world, the logic of that world is as consistent to me as the logic of any mathematical world I've ever lived in. This stuff is just straight math. It is insane. Buddhism. And that's what I'm trying to say, is the fact that I can say this because I live in the world of math, you see. And it's a proof, I have proof, my works of art are proof that I live in that world. Because you could not go into that world and navigate that space and create the adiabatic isometric mapping algorithm. You couldn't do the calculation. You couldn't write my paper on the differential geometric approach to quantum gravity consistent with entropic properties of statistical mechanics. You can't write that. You can't even read it. You see what I'm saying? These are objective facts. They're objective facts. The calculations are objective calculations. Anyone can verify them. I can tell you exactly what I did and how I did it. I can show you all my code. I can show you the process step by step, explain why this goes to that, why this happens here. And so I have the capacity to live in really complicated spaces. And not only that, but I have to be able to break them down, comprehend them. And so the lens with which I'm reading Buddhism and Christianity is the same lens that I've developed through mathematics and physics. And these worlds are real. I create simulations. I live in them. I have little abstract images of black holes in my head. Almost every calculation I've ever done, I have some sort of abstract memory of it. Whether it be from the calculations I've done, or it be from the pictures I've drawn to conceptualize. You guys just have no idea how much I've done in the space of math. You have no idea what I've done, and you have no idea how complicated it is. It is beyond your comprehension. I can guarantee it. Pull up my papers and try to read them. Pull up my papers. I have 4 main papers. The adiabatic isometric mapping algorithm for embedding 2 spheres in Euclidean 3 space. I have the maximum advantage of quantum illumination. I have the Wang and Yao quasi-local energy for extreme Kerr spacetimes. And I have differential geometric approach to quantum gravity consistent with entropic principles of statistical mechanics. I also have a couple of conference papers. Quantum illumination and beyond. I think it was something else. But I have 2 conference papers. I mean, they're actually pretty good. I mean, one of them is including the vacuum to the, concluding the vacuum in the quantum discord analysis, where I show that quantum discord is equal Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty cool calculation. I like it. I think it's impressive. You guys couldn't read that either. You'd have no idea what it says, but there are people who can, and all those people have the same spirit as me. I live in the world of physics and math. I live in the world of Buddhism. I live in the world of Christianity. My mind, what do I spend my time thinking about? That's the awareness. That's the awareness. What am I aware of? What world am I in? Once you're aware of the world, you're awake to it and you can see, and then you can navigate that space and you can feel that space. You can read the space. And from your reading, you can write on the space, which means you can program it. And so what I'm saying is that in Buddhism, the world they creates a remote control for your body, your mind. It tells you how to program your mind. It gives you the Buddha remote control. And it has these effects where, like I'm telling you, recently, I've had these random kicks of happiness, just randomly. I listened to the first three chapters on the Vimalakirti. It's a character in Mahayana Buddhist text. And I just was listening to those and I was eating my lunch. I was like, oh my God, this is beautiful. The one where he's at the end where he's talking about where he's dying and he used the opportunity of his death to explain the Dharma. That shit was amazing. Amazing. And then you connect that with the Vajrapanya Paramita Sutra and the Heart Sutra. And it's like those sutras together really explain a lot. And the inconceivable state of Buddhahood. You put all those together, which I think is called Saguna Deva Sutra. You put all those together and you can understand all of Buddhism. Those sutras are enough. I really believe that. Those sutras are enough. And so because of that, those sutras and like living in that world, just kind of deciding to be happy and letting go and just thinking about Ajahn Brahm. How much do I listen to Ajahn Brahm? How much do I see? How aware? How many people know who Ajahn Brahm is? If you know who Ajahn Brahm is, raise your hand. If you don't, then you're unaware of him. You don't even know he exists. He's not in your world. He's not in your reality. You're unaware of him completely. Whereas I am aware. I spend my time with him and his ideas. So the worlds that I live in are places like Buddhist monk world, Catholic priest world, talking to my Christian friend world, talking to my mathematician friend world, going to jiu-jitsu world, mixed martial arts world, UFC world, quantum physics world. They're all worlds, they're all real. And like what I'm trying to explain is like mathematics, you know it's real because you can use it to write code and engineer things and send stuff to the moon. Like we all know it's real. It's as real as get shot, hurt, or get shot, die, fall off roof, 20-story roof on your head, die. We all know how that works. And there's these fields of study like physics and the mathematics that allow you to predict the future with such a precision that you can program things at the level of the quantum. Like we're actually literally trying to program reality at the level of quantum. Like what is quantum mechanics? People want to know what quantum mechanics is. It's so crazy. Like I've been living in this world for so long that for me, what is quantum mechanics? Like the fact that there isn't some sort of consensus on it right now, like it blows my mind because I think it's actually pretty obvious what quantum mechanics is. I mean, you spend all your time like, oh, who does this person think he is? He can give a canonical interpretation of quantum mechanics. Like, yes. You have to look into my paper on quantum statistical mechanics. I mean, just think about it. How many people do you know who have published featured papers on quantum statistical mechanics? So it's like I spend so much time in that world. It's all I think about. 7-8 hours a day. I go to work. I think about quantum physics. I've been doing that for like 7 years, 6 years. Could you imagine just sitting down and thinking about quantum physics for 6 years straight? Like to do my job is to ask the question, what is quantum mechanics? I have to know what that world is. It has a Hilbert space. It has states. It has operators on states. Like it has this structure that you can be used as pieces of a machine that you can put together and then do a calculation, make predictions. And in that paper, I made a prediction and it came true. It was amazing. And I also observed something that was unexpected, which is the constant Renge entropy of order 3. See, and anyone who can hear this and understand it to where it makes sense to them, I know the people at my job, most people at my job wouldn't even understand what I'm saying. But there are people out there who understand. Like, these are the people who know my spirit. These are the people who live in this world. These are the people who have authority to create there. These are the gods of this world. We are the creators of this world. We hold the world up together. We have a shared spirit, a shared reality. All quantum physicists share the spirit of quantum physics. We live in the world. So I sit there and I think about quantum mechanics. I come up with abstractions in my head. I think about how the abstractions related to equations. I sit there, I create these little machines out of quantum. I write code, do little quantum simulations, calculations. It's absolutely insane what my job is. And so even in this ramble, like the whole point, as I'm trying to say, is that this is an objectively real world. And like the way I perceive reality is I use all of the information that I have of all the worlds I live in. And then when I look and say, what is this thing? What is reality? I use every single one of those worlds to give an explanation of what I'm experiencing and what it is. And then I have to do that though by finding the symmetry between the experience I'm having and how those worlds evolve. Like what's the relationship between the world of quantum physics and the world of basketball? What is the relationship between the world of quantum mechanics and the world of Fourier transforms? How do Fourier transforms live in quantum world? Like to allow all the worlds to imbue meaning on each other, you have to say, okay, here's the scenario. And the scenario I used earlier, just to remind people, the scenario I used earlier was thinking about Buddhism, the Buddhism world. And when I was thinking about the Buddhism world, what I was saying is the macro data, the consistent data, the data that's consistent with everything, is the sensation, perception, conditioning, and consciousness. Sensation as in the input, perception, which you have some sort of mental image, mental objects, some sort of perception. That perception is created by conditioning, which is basically your configuration. And then your consciousness has to do with awareness. So your awareness mixed with conditioning, mixed with perception, and mixed with sensation. That's like the root data. So and then when I'm watching a movie, oh, that's happening. I'm watching a movie. I'm getting some inputs. It's giving a perception. This is based off my conditioning, and I'm aware of it. There's some degree to which I'm aware. And so when you're watching a movie, that's what's happening. When you're writing code, that's what's happening. You're going through your inner world in your head, an abstract world in your head. And then you're thinking about, okay, when I do this will happen. When I do that. And then you have this set of feelings that go along with what it feels like to be doing these things. And so I think that this is an example of a bottom turtle perspective. It's like there is a relationship between sensation, perception, conditioning, and consciousness that can be attached to every single experience you have about anything. That every experience is going to have this sequence or this kind of concepts related to it. So and then when you're trying to understand what are sensation, perception, and conditioning and consciousness, it's like, well, take all of the things for which that is a consistent theme, consistent set of data, all the experiences associated with that. Man, I hope I'm making sense. Yeah, but you take all those things and you think to yourself, what world is this? Because the world will tell you about the experiences you have. What world is this? Every world has sensation, perception, conditioning, consciousness. You're aware of the world. You're conscious of it. You live in it. You experience it. That should be the foundation of a world. A world being a something that is defined in relation to the perception of a mind, the existence of a mind. So in this case, it's like, let's define world only in relation to mind. Like, we can even just use it as an axiomatic definition and see what the consequences, where the consequences lead if you do. World is inherently associated with the existence of mind. Because when you're thinking about a world, you're thinking about an experience. What is reality? The reality of that world. What feelings do I have? What experiences do I have? And why? Is it a world of suffering? So then, like, I was thinking about this, and I think about, okay, now let's think about my random spurts of happiness that I had at these random moments from just deciding to be happy, just at work, and like, oh, I'm just happy for some reason right now. I just want to be happy. It happened to me like 3 or 4 times recently, actually. I don't know why. I just feel like I want to be happy today, so I'm just happy. And I know it's directly related to Buddhism and Christianity, to be honest. Both of them. And so it's like when I was watching, so I've been watching Gordon Ramsay, and I was thinking about like how amazing this person is. Like, I wish to God that one day Gordon Ramsay will listen to this recording, because that dude is amazing. If his personal life is anything like his professional life in terms of how he behaves and treats others, then the dude is a fucking saint, man. Like, the dude is like, just think about all the good that dude has done. Think about all the people he's helped. All the people are just like, I'm so amazed. I can't believe I get to cook for Gordon Ramsay. I can't believe he said my food was good. I can't believe he mentored me. He's so nice. He's so helpful. Then think of all the shows he spent just trying to encourage people and just like trying to like show people what they're doing wrong and tell them the truth and stuff. And it's like, okay, well, you're an idiot because this is all just editing. It's like, well, maybe it is. Maybe it's not. Maybe the dude is really sincere. And if there's any sincerity in here anywhere, then it's like, man. And so what I'm saying is that I like spending time watching Gordon Ramsay shows because I feel like they're really wholesome. I don't have to have my guard up here. I learn a lot of stuff about food. I have fun watching it with my wife. It's all happy. There's no identity politics crap in it. There's no political crap. It's just wholesome fun. Wholesome, positive fun. The same thing with like Gary Vee. So then you start looking at what worlds do you live in? Who do you spend your time with your awareness? And now you get to the idea of where your responsibility comes in. Because now it's a question of, well, what do I find interesting? What data do I interact with? Do I interact with a lot of negative data? Why am I so interested in negative things? I could be spending all my time in Buddhism world. I could be spending all my time in, like, I like spending a lot of time in the UFC world, mixed martial arts world. I like spending time in jiu-jitsu world. I go to a jiu-jitsu gym. I strangle and get strangled by people. I love that world. Magic the Gathering world, that's another world. Any video game you've ever played, those are worlds. Any book you've read, any movie you watched, they're all worlds. They all exist and they're all real. And so you have a responsibility to choose what you're aware of, what you give your attention to. Because attention has to do with awareness, has to do with consciousness, has to do with ability to predict the future, has to do with the ability to program, the ability to create art, the ability to create reality. How powerful of a creator are you? Are you the puppet or are you the puppet master? Have you put down good roots? These are all now your responsibility once you become aware. And the whole point is that when I'm talking, when you hear me explain my quantum mechanics world, and anyone doubts me, I have my art to back me up. You will simply see that art. You will simply see those calculations. I can show you my calculation books that I have for like over 10 years. Just page after page after page of calculation. I can explain them all to you. I can show you my textbooks. I can show you my homeworks. I can show you the grades I've got, which sometimes that's not so great because sometimes I didn't do good. Sometimes I did. Sometimes I didn't. I can show you my awards. I can show you the people I've published with. I can show you the people who have cited my work. And this is another thing about me. I don't explain these things too because I don't know. I don't know. Just talk about yourself, man. Like I remember one time. So here's the story. Right before my wedding, the day of my wedding, or the day before my wedding, I think I was in Kansas because we had the wedding in Kansas. I was at my parents' house, And I remember looking up the adiabatic isometric mapping algorithm paper because now I remember there was like I had a version on the archive, and whoever knows what that is knows that's again another world of existence you may not be aware of. But for scientists, the world of the archive is just like a basic fact of reality. So no, I was at my parents' house, and what happened is on the archive I had an old version. I had a version of the paper that had like some error on it somewhere. I wasn't happy with something. I think it was like some older version that I put up, and I think it was an older version in which I had a really crappy drawing of my manifold that I embedded, and then I redid it with this scale that tells you about the curvature, because the color represents curvature, and it looked a lot better. So what I did is I uploaded that version onto the archive. And then I'd done that like 3 or 4 days before my wedding. So then the day before my wedding, I go to look to make sure that the updated version has been uploaded, and I see it, I got a citation. I was like, what? A citation? What the fuck? Like seriously, it's like this part of my life this happened. It's like a citation. Whoa, what? That's cool, man. I was so excited. I called my advisor. Man, Warner, someone cited my paper. The people who cited it were researchers at MIT. So it's like I don't talk about this, but this is a big trophy for me, man. Just having one citation from a group at MIT, and it's not like it's like a citation that's like, oh, we use some of the techniques from this paper to write our own algorithm. They're doing hyperbolic stuff though. And then I remember one time my paper, another paper that was part of my thesis, the Wang and Yao quasi-local energy of extreme Kerr. I remember looking at it one day and getting a new citation, like, oh, a new citation. And then I look at it, and it's from 2 people, one from Oxford and the other one from Cambridge. And it was like a significant citation. Like these people clearly read my thesis. It wasn't like some throwaway citation. It was like a pretty significant citation. So it's like, holy crap. I've never, so let me put this like recap kind of my resume. Like this is legitimate. I applied for a fellowship recently, and I put this in, It's like part of my resume. And part of my resume is that I have published papers with professors at 2 Ivy League universities, one of which is a Fields medalist and was the department chair of mathematics at Harvard. So I published with those 2 people. And then I've had my paper cited by people at MIT, Cambridge, and Oxford. So it's like, man, that to me, those are some pretty decent trophies. I've also had a paper that I published. The idea is essentially my idea, though I did have a lot of help from my co-authors, but it was like I was the main author, I was the first author, was the maximum advantage of quantum illumination. When I published that paper, I got a editor suggested paper in Physical Review A. That's another one of my trophies, adding it to my resume. And then it's like, yeah, I got a featured paper in entropy, which I'm pretty sure, like this recent paper I've written, it's bananas. Like I swear to God, I think it's absolutely amazing. One of the greatest pieces of art I've ever created in my life. I'm so proud of that thing. And the whole point is, it's like, these are all real worlds that I live in, that I'm a master of, that I'm a god of, that I'm a creator of, who has authority here, who has prestige here, who can see, who has sight, who is aware. This is one of the worlds I live in. The world of theoretical physics. So this is who I am. I'm a theoretical physicist. This is how a theoretical physicist thinks about reality. You have to understand, because I'm using all of the consciousness from each world I live in to imbue meaning on the concept, what is reality? All of these worlds that I'm mentioning to you. How many people do jujitsu? How many people know how to throw a punch? How many people can fight at in an orthodox and southpaw stance? I mean, I can strike from there. I can't fight. I've never been in a fight, but I guarantee you, look at my Instagram. I think people will be impressed if they take the time to look through my Instagram. Playa Papa Pa. Go look it up. If you're someone who's listening to this who does martial arts or likes martial arts, or you're even someone who is in the UFC, you're Israel Adesanya, you're whoever, and you're listening to this, go and look at me throwing those punches, some of the strikes that I've done. They're not going to be great. They're not going to be the greatest thing ever. They're not going to like blow your pants off. They're not like, I don't think that I'm like some elite person, but I think you're like, not bad at the very least. Interesting. So then it's like, how many people live in that world? Who knows the mechanics of a punch? When you're watching Conor McGregor on The Ultimate Fighter telling his fighters, oh, you have good mechanics. Think about the mechanics. So someone who's never thrown a punch, they like, what does that word mean to them? Think about the mechanics. Now think about someone who can throw a punch and who has thrown a punch. Think about Alexander Volkanovski or any fighter in the UFC who all know how to throw punches. When they hear something like think about the mechanics, they're going to think about all the mechanics through all their experience and training about throwing a punch. All the ways you can throw a punch, the mechanics of it. And that's a world they live in. That's a world they live in, just like I live in math world. But I also live in that world. I'm a much smaller being there than I am in physics world. And in physics world, I'm not even that big of a being, but I'm much larger than people who are completely unaware of physics world. I'm a huge being to them. And so it's like we all live in our realms of reality. And then from those realms, we use our understanding of what is reality in that world to navigate it, to create reality. And in doing so, we're playing games. You can think of everything in terms of games, because games are all about trying to win. And then so that means there are rules, which means there are conditions for winning and losing, for taking a step forward or taking a step back, from taking a better move or a worse move. The rules of the games are constraints that create a world that you're navigating, and you're trying to win by programming reality, by bringing into existence what you want. Do you want to be famous? What do you want? What are you trying to do? Do you want to have kids? Do you want to be happy? Do you want to, what do you want to do? What reality do you live in? What games do you want to play? What do you value? Because then your values are going to determine what games you play. I have said this stuff so many times on the podcast. It's like, I don't know what the exact code is that I have to say to where people get overwhelmed and hit with a jolt of awakening. That's what I expect is going to happen. People listening to this. Eventually, if you listen to it enough, you're going to get so much data, you're going to hear so many concepts so many times, and you're going to get so many different explanations of the same thing that eventually you're just going to be listening to one day and you're just going to awaken. And you're going to be like, what the fuck? It reminds me of when in Buddhism, they talk about going from different jhanas. But it's like, eventually you're going to understand the degree to which what I'm saying is real. And then you're going to listen to every single bottom turtle perspective I've explained, and you're going to start generating the images yourself without me. And then you're going to start feeling this cascading of just amplifying the signal of what is reality. When you start bringing to bear all of the worlds that you live in to imbue meaning on a question in any other world. You use the other world you live in to explain the world you're focusing on. Like they're all modeling each other. They're all in relationship with each other. None of them exist on their own. They're all interdependent. The relationship between all worlds. What is the relationship between all worlds? The thusness, the suchness of reality, the macro data that's consistent with all, the eternal, the thing that never changes, the thing that is not impermanent, dependent origination. Minds require the interaction with other minds. Everything is dual. There's always a self and an other. But that's where perception comes from. And if you start collapsing the duals by neither living in up or down, instead of thinking of up and down as two different things, you understand that they are the same thing. Because without up, there is no down. It's the contrast between up and down that gives meaning to up and down. Without down, there is no up. Without good, there is no bad. So you stop hating bad things. You stop hating things because you understand that without the contrast, the good thing wouldn't exist. And so once you're living in the world of samsara, when you're living in this world of sentient beings, there's always going to be suffering. That's just that's just baked in the cake. You just have to accept it and be happy. And that's why it's just like, be happy. Just choose to be happy. because the not happiness is coming from what you're focusing on, which affects which world you live in, which affects what experiences you have. What are you aware of? What roots are you putting down? What are you paying attention to? What are you aware of? And then it's like, when you understand that, it's, to get rid of the binary, to break them down, you have to embrace the paradox. You have to embrace A and not A, which means that you see a glass that is halfway filled up with water, you don't think it's half empty and you don't think it's half full. You just say it's a glass. You just look at the form. Because if you're a pessimist, you look at it where it's half empty. If you're an optimist, you look at it where it's half full. Those are usually the connections. And so if you're a pessimist, you live in the pessimism world. If you're an optimist, you live in the optimist world. But if you live in neither, or you live in both at the same time, like, to be able to live in both of them at the same time, you can't live in either. And I think that that's like the collapsing of the binary. It's like stepping out of it, stepping out of the world. Because it's like potential. It's potential. If you don't say it's up or down or pessimist or optimist, if you don't say it's one or the other, then you have the potential to live in either. But if you live in one, you can't live in the other. And so I think that this is really associated with the ideas in quantum mechanics, because remember my question earlier, what is quantum mechanics? Quantum mechanics is one word. One word. I can explain all of quantum mechanics in one word. Literally. And I wonder if people can guess what it is. Just think about it. What was the word I would use? So I'll give the runner-up that I think people would use, and I think they'd be wrong. Completely wrong. Here's the one that I think a lot of people think. Entanglement. Wrong. Nope. Superposition. Quantum mechanics is superposition. What is superposition? Superposition is to be in the state A and not A at the same time. Schrodinger's cat. It's one of the most pop culture understandings of quantum mechanics because it's the essence of it. It's the essence of the entire damn thing. That one concept. Superposition. Superposition. Dead and alive at the same time. It's in neither world. This is potential. This is gauge. The constraint data that you have, which is water half full. This is the form, the realm of forms in Buddhism. You have a glass that's filled halfway up with water. That's the form. And if that's all you're looking at is the form, then you don't live in half full or half empty. You don't live in either one of those worlds. All you see is the form. And so because you live in neither one, it's like you can live in both at the same time. Because there is some underlining data, the macro data. And the macro data is the form. The macro data is the glass with the water in it. That's the macro data. Half full or half empty are both consistent with the macro data. And so as long as you only see the form, then you don't live in either world. You have the potential to live in one or the other. But once you live in one world, then that potential gets used up. And I think that this potential that's associated with your memory, go back to thinking about memory on a phone. Think of memory as potential. You have an object that has so many degrees of freedom, so many configurations it can be placed in. Think of the number of configurations that are associated with the dimension of the space. Think of the dimension of the space of an iPhone or a smartphone. Think of the dimension of all the data that can be stored on it. Each different data stored for each phone owned by each individual is a different possible configuration of the phone. So you have the space of all configurations, which tells you something about the dimension. And so when the thing is clean to where it has no memory, nothing has been conditioned on it. There's no memory on it. When it's in that state, it has the potential to be in any one of those configurations. But once you put it in one configuration, that uses up potential memory. It uses up potential. So then when your phone gets completely full, you lose potential. And then when you erase stuff off your phone, you get rid of the memory, you create potential. Yeah. So I think that's how Yeah, so stepping outside. So and then it's like when you're thinking about all the worlds you live in, if you live in one reality, then you're not living in the the other reality. And so you're trying to live in both realities at the same time, to live in the world of A and not A. Superposition. You're trying to live in the world of A and not A. Man, I hope this is making sense. I really do. Yeah, but this is entropy, by the way. This is basically the whole point of my paper. It's the idea that there's some macro data, and then from that macro data, you use the Lie group symmetries to generate all the purifications consistent with that macro data. Each one of those purifications is a microstate, and the volume of the manifold of purifications is a measure of entropy. That's basically the whole. And so the whole point is that you can think of the ensemble of pure states associated with a particular density operator. So now I'm going into more quantum mechanics, like into details of my paper, but density operators are quantum states. They have the capacity to be mixed states. They're projectors. And if they're missing information, then there exists this higher dimensional space where you can create these things called purifications. And then for a given macro state, there's a bunch of purifications consistent. Think of each one of those purifications as a world. And then the macro state is the potential of that world. And so if all you have is the data of the macro state, that's the only thing you know, then that means that all of those micro states are potential states of reality. They're potential states of reality. They're all consistent with the macro data. And so the only thing you need to assume such a thing is the idea of missing information. If there's missing information, then you're going to have a set of potential worlds. And so my whole paper is about defining a quantum entropy based off of the number of worlds that are consistent with some given known data. So I think that that's basically like the multiverse, because my main idea about quantum mechanics is that there isn't infinite information everywhere in the universe. So what I'm saying is that if you're trying to define a physical system, you do that by defining its degrees of freedom and a setting of its degrees of freedom. That's how you define a physical system. And so if you're trying to say what the state of a system is exactly, you have to give infinitely precise concepts and infinite data. So in that regard, I don't think that you can ever define the exact state of anything. I think that what you have is a limit to the amount of information, which is relative to your size. There's a limit of the amount of information. And since information is stored in energy and matter, there's a limit on matter and energy. And so to have infinite information, you need infinite energy and matter to store infinite data. And so just assume that there is an infinite energy and matter everywhere in the universe, and that the universe isn't divergent with infinite energy everywhere. And if you assume that, then what that creates is something like a machine precision, like the amount of information that can be stored, like something like a limit. And then from that limit, what you have is a set of constraints, which are the configurations of the physical energy and matter. You have the constraints, which is the configuration of the energy and matter. And then from those constraints, there are a set of what would be purifications, which would be a world with no missing information, but there's always many of them. So that's the whole point, is that, I'm screwing this up. Yeah, so what I'm saying is something like, I'm trying to understand what quantum mechanics is. What is reality? I live in Buddhism world and quantum mechanics world. And so I'm looking at the symmetry between Buddhism world and quantum mechanics world. One of the symmetries is, it is a world. Therefore, sensation, perception, conditioning, and consciousness. That's an overlap. I live in this world, so there has to be those things for a sentient being to live in this world and have power to create in that world. So it is a world. It is consistent with the emphasis on paradox, A and not A, superposition, koans, that relationship. It's consistent with the idea of gauge and their forms. So the idea of a form, which is like macro data, and then the possibilities are like that are consistent with that form are microdata. So then you have in like quantum mechanics, it's like form, like one of the analogies of form can be a the data in a density operator, which is macro data. And then all of the micros, all the purifications are microstates consistent with the macro data. All the potential worlds that come from the form. So if you let go of conditioning, then you can, so instead of living in one of the worlds, like glass half full world, instead of living in that world, what you do is you step out of that world by embracing the paradox and living in the world of form in which both worlds can be true. They both have potential. They're both possibilities. And so that would be like saying that there's a density operator with some macro data, there's a set of purifications, and then thinking that the answer is definitely one purification. What you do is you, instead of putting a Dirac delta distribution on the probability of all purifications consistent with macro data, you take that delta function and instead smooth it out to a maximally mixed distribution over the set of purifications. Because the delta function represents a infinite peak of probability, like a really narrow peak to where it's like, okay, that's basically a pure state. Like that you live in that pure state, you live in that world. Whereas if you put a maximally mixed distribution, which is a evenly mixed distribution, saying that I have no idea if it's one or the other, then you have the potential to go and to be placed in any of the worlds. This is what I'm saying. And so the idea of stepping from the realm of form, like in Buddhism, I think is consistent with stepping out of a particular micro state and then backing out and embodying the macro state. And so being in the micro state is like being in a specific world. And then having a maximally mixed distribution is like stepping back into the realm of form. And so when you do that, it's like you stop identifying with the micro state, but then you identify with the macro data. And so I think that when you identify with the macro data, you now identify with the sentient being that has the capacity to be in all micro states, to instead of seeing the form and then imposing a particular interpretation, a particular worldview on that form. Instead, you look with the perception of the sentient being associated with the macro data who has the potential to be placed in all the micro states. And then what you're trying to do in Buddhism is you're trying to step outside of all micro states. All right, so let's go back to the analogy of glass half empty, glass half full. In this case, the macro data is that there's simply a form, a glass with water in it. And so to not live in one world versus the other, like say, imagine that you live in where you look at it, you go, that glass is half empty. So it's like, nope, that glass is half empty. That's what it is. Because you think that, you can't see that the glass is half full is consistent with the macro data. So you live in the pessimism world. And so if you want to move to the realm of form, what you want to do is understand that there are many ways to interpret this thing. There are many consistent interpretations. And so when you go into the realm of form, you're not imposing anything to force you to be in one world versus the other. And so that process of stepping out is to, instead of identify with the sentient being that lives in pessimism world, you identify with a sentient being that has the potential to live in either pessimism world or optimism world. And so now that's the sense of that has let go of one self, and now you have another self. But this self has more freedom. You see, this self has more freedom, has more potential. And so with Buddhism, it's like, how do I step out of all minor cells to step back into some sort of larger self? So think of like, and perhaps this is a good way of thinking of it, but think of the macro data as like the puppet master and the micro state is the puppet. Maybe that's correct. I'm not sure, but let's go with that analogy for the time being. But the point is that, you're always trying to step out of a particular conditioning. So you have to think of being in the glass half empty world is due to your conditioning. That's the reason why you place that perception on the form, even though the form does not dictate that it has to be one or the other. The form allows for the potential of both. And so when you let go of pessimism world, you are not clinging to that identity anymore. And now you have the identity of the sentience that has the potential of form. And so the idea of the suchness or the tathagata or the thusness of all is like, think of it as the macro data that is consistent with all perceptions, the macro data that is merely the suchness of all, the thing that is true about all, that which runs through all, that which is eternal, that which is not impermanent. And so you're trying to step out to embody that. And the whole point with Buddhism is that if you want infinite potential, then you have to be completely unconstrained. You're like trying to get to the state where the iPhone is completely clean of any conditioning. And because conditioning comes with a perception, comes with conditioning, comes with characteristics, it comes with a perception, it comes with a sense of self. And so one of the things that is true, that is consistent with all, is the idea of emptiness, which is to say that anything that is singular, that has no relationship with anything else, is empty. And so when you actually look at any characteristic or any perception, and you keep asking, what is this? What is this? What is this? And you're trying to get to some pure state, some pure understanding, and you're trying to get to the essential pureness of it. What you're going to find is that you put all your resources into that. So you're only focused on that. So you can't compare and contrast it to anything else. And then once you put all your resources into this one perception, and all compare and contrast as a result is lost, then that thing, the only thing left for that thing is emptiness. And this is true for all perceptions. And so this emptiness is associated with entropy, you see. So the more you let go of a particular clinging, the more you can step back into potential of possible identities, possible selves. Yeah, this is what I was trying to say. So for example, it's like I can embody the microstate of Shannon, but I am a microstate of the world of quantum physicists. And so, but I'm a microstate of many worlds. I'm a microstate of the world of quantum physicists. I'm a microstate of the world of differential geometry, of jujitsu, of martial arts. I mean, I'm a martial arts hobbyist and enthusiast. So within the world of martial arts, there are many sentient beings. Some of them are professionals. Some of them are world champions. Some of them are hobbyists. Some of them are, think of all the different people who embody the spirit of martial arts and a relationship to it, as opposed to someone who spends absolutely no time thinking about it and has never done it in their life. See? So each one of these worlds, I live in all of them simultaneously. You also live in, everyone else also lives in a bunch of worlds simultaneously. The potential to live in many worlds simultaneously is due to the fact that there's a limit to the amount of information. That as long as there's a limit to the amount of information, as long as there is missing information, then you have potential. And I think it's that potential that allows consciousness to exist. I believe that this potential is the gauge, the thing that is consistent with the macro data, the symmetries. If all you have is the macro data, then all the micro states are symmetric with respect to that macro data. Otherwise, you're saying that you have more information. So like for me, because I live in mathematics world, I can use my sight in that world to attach mathematics world to Buddhism world. This is just something that most people cannot do. They'd never think to do it because mathematics world, martial arts world, these different worlds I live in just simply do not exist to you. America world, Kansas world, Florida world. It's like, what reality is this? What reality are we in? And the realities you inhabit tell you who you are. Who are you? I am the spirit of these worlds that overlap with all these worlds. All of the overlap represent relationships. I just don't know. I don't know. I sometimes I feel like my rambles go well, then I listen back to them and I'm not too happy with it. But my goodness gracious, like, can nobody hear what I'm saying, or do I just sound like a crazy person? I know I don't sound like a crazy person. That's the thing. I know I'm not crazy. If the data that I just presented is not convincing to you that I'm speaking the truth, can you find a theme? And if you find a theme, you have to ask yourself, how bad is it? Is it a big theme, or does he have it like 90% correct and then 10% wrong? Can you understand why I might be wrong in some instances and just provide a critique to patch it up? Is it a patch, or is there some sort of glaring deep flaw in everything I'm saying that just makes it all nonsense? I highly doubt the latter. I'm just not that stupid. I've created too many things. I'm just not that stupid. I'm just not. I'm just not. I know I'm not. I know I'm not stupid. And I know I'm not crazy. Hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully this is worth uploading. Let me see if it's still recording. An hour, that's pretty decent size. It's probably gonna be good in some places, trail off in others, not make much sense. I just gotta accept that. I'm never gonna get a perfect recording of this stuff. But I think next time, or maybe I'll do it in part of the intro, I'm gonna read my poem entitled The Ultimate Abstraction. And then I think I want to talk about that and upload that. Maybe I can upload this and then upload that as an episode after, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, I'm tired. Peace.